is going to be a crazy day today. Yeah, I don't think I'll see the children until about 5. But it's a service day.
Okay.
It's a service day. That's what I'll call it. That's what I'll call it. So we're going on over to YouTube as well. Please share the. Okay, great stuff. Please share the link with those who should be here, might not know that it's happening, and please come and join us here. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to be recording. Right. Good afternoon, everyone. For those who are coming on for the first time, my name is Joanna Daniel. I'm a trauma-informed counselor that lives in Wales, and we do conferences and retreats for people who are adult survivors of childhood trauma and abuse. We haven't had any retreats this year because, of course, for obvious reasons. But we wanted to do this mental health summit to talk about how lockdown is affecting people in our communities, because we know that we're disproportionately affected by lots and lots of stuff, lots of social inequalities and deprivation, and things that cause, our mental health to become worse. And so we wanted to do this conference. And when I reached out to my colleagues, everybody just responded yes straight away. And we're so really grateful. Our speaker today is Sherian Best. And Sherian is in the US. It's 7 a.m. on a Sunday morning, and she's here pretty as ever to serve us. We really appreciate you and your time, Sherian. Really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today.
So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sherian before we go into the questions. Sherian is the owner and psychotherapist at Broad Hollow Psychotherapy Service, and she has 2 bachelor's degree and a master's degree, and completes postgraduate certifications in trauma studies and addiction studies. And in her career, she worked with child and family services, working with a variety of populations ranging from residential placement, youth mentoring, homelessness, and domestic violence and abuse services. In 2003, she became a licensed master social worker and focused on mental health treatment. During that same year, she began working at the Mental Health Association of Nassau County, and she left that in 2018. Right. She's a proud member of the National Association of Professional Women in Long Island. So, I mean, what I wanted to read was that Sharon has a long history of working with mental health and working with people who have experienced mental health. And I was just telling Sharon how providential it is that we're here today talking about trauma, and later on we're talking about Black men and mental health because of what's going on currently. You cannot escape the news, the social media feed, everything that's happening. So once again, Sharon, thank you so much. Is there anything you want to tell the people that I've missed out that you want to tell us about you before we get going?
No, that's fine. And I'm pretty sure that things will just happen organically throughout this conversation. So, but
Right.
Thank you. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me today. And I look forward to our discussion.
Great stuff. I must tell you as well that Sharon has a TED Talk on knowing your aces. I watched it. Really, really, really informative, really good. So go on over to YouTube after this and find her TED Talk and watch that. I watch it with my sons, actually. I watch it with the children.
Wow.
They understood it. I mean, they come to my seminars and workshops anyway, so they understood what was happening, but they were able to understand, which was really good.
That's great. Thank you for that.
So today, that's what we're going to kick off with. Sharon and I are talking about trauma and recovery. And as I said, it's so providential because of what's going on. Lots of people are being re-traumatized. Lots of people will become traumatized. Lots of young people and children will see things that affects them deeply. And what are some of the things that we can do to deal with trauma as it happens, not after, because it's happening now. Lots of people are activated. They are living in fight or flight. What are some of the things that people can do to help themselves not make themselves become ill?
Right. I think that it's really important to, right now what people are experiencing is acute stress, right?
Yeah.
And it's really important to try as best as you can to reduce exposure. So I thought I was safeguarding my own mental health by not watching videos
Mm,
and by purposely not watching them. And it's hard because the still images that you see of George Floyd are just as disturbing,
absolutely.
and it's hard to not see that. So we really do have to make the effort to avoid exposure as much as we can. It's
Yeah.
important to be informed, right? We
Yeah.
have to walk this fine line of being informed because we need to know what to do. We need to know how to prepare ourselves. We need to know, just what's going on, but at the
Mm,
same time, reduce the exposure. So
mm-hmm,
I think that
mm-hmm.
that's the very first thing to do. The best approach right now is to not watch videos.
Mm, mm.
Try to stay off of different social media sites that you think are going to expose you to certain things.
Yeah. And it doesn't mean that you don't care
It
when
doesn't mean that you
when
don't
you when
care.
you do that. I didn't watch the videos and I was impacted. Just seeing the image alone was
Yes,
impacting. So, and I had to take not a moment, I had to take the afternoon to just kind of get myself, my thoughts, because I work with things like that sometimes, and working with it and then seeing it live, knowing that that family member is gonna have to go talk to a therapist about that. It just,
absolutely.
so those are the ways that it impacted me, and I had to take the afternoon to kind of just calm myself, regulate myself, and calibrate
Absolutely.
my thoughts and think, how do I feel, what do I want to say, and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
So reduce exposure is really good. It doesn't mean you're not compassionate enough. It doesn't mean that you don't care. It just means that you know when to step away and to look after yourself.
Absolutely.
So that leads me into ACEs. For those who don't know what ACEs are, it's adverse childhood experience, and it's some research that was done. They looked at 10 areas and how um, children between the ages of, was it 5 and 6, or those early developmental stages, how childhood trauma affects us throughout our lifetime. So
Yeah.
let's talk
Anything under 18.
about
Under 18.
18, right? Let's talk about ACEs in our community, Sharian, and its contribution to mental health.
Okay. Okay. So the ACEs study was done in 1995 to 1997, and the target participant of the ACEs study was actually around 50 years old. They were typically white. They were
Mhm.
uh, pretty well off, middle class um, people. And so it wasn't necessarily targeted towards people of color, and
Mhm.
it wasn't targeted towards children, but adults and their childhood experiences,
Yeah.
right? And so we take the information from the ACEs study, and we could really generalize certain things. So um, the ACEs study asked these participants about exposure to physical abuse, emotional abuse, neglect, family discord, having a family member who was incarcerated, having a family member who has mental illness, a household member who has mental illness, substance use issues, exposure to sexual abuse. And they asked these participants, and again, we're talking about a 50-year-old, pretty well off white person. And the expectation was that these people did not have exposure to these childhood adversities. And what they found was that was quite the opposite, that over 60% of these participants had at least one exposure,
Mhm.
and several others had exposure to 2 to 3, and then some had 4 and more. And what they found was a correlation between early childhood exposure to traumas or adverse experiences and the onset of these high risk behaviors, and also poor health outcomes throughout their lifespan.
Mhm.
And I think it's important to note that the poor health outcomes were not necessarily a result of the high risk behaviors. So there were some people who were exposed to childhood adversity and did not necessarily use drugs or alcohol, have poor diet, the high risk factors, and they still ended up having higher rates of cancer and heart disease and autoimmune issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there's a correlation between early childhood exposure to adversity and poor health outcomes, and ultimately early death.
Mm-hmm. That's the part that really shook me when I heard about the research. The early death really, really
Yes.
affected me that bit. So, I mean, when I heard about the adverse childhood experiences first a couple of years ago, some years ago, my first thought was, who is going to bring it to our community? That was my first thought, because I know we don't always have that kind of access. See, similarly, when I started learning about attachment and how to heal attachment injuries, my first thought was, how am I going to get this to the inner city where I know lots of ethnic minorities are, and they don't have this access to this information?
Right.
So now that we've explained that a bit, what's the connection between that and mental health?
So just to kind of piggyback on what you just said, that really the way that it comes to the people is through us, right? Because I had been in the field for about I had been in the field for about 7 years already before I had even heard about
Mm,
the ACEs study, or even that trauma was a thing. You
mm,
know, trauma is a thing, but I didn't know that it was a research thing,
mm,
right? I didn't know about the connections that we're about to talk about. And so for me, it absolutely changed my practice. I
mine
thought about
too.
the clients that I had seen before I had gotten that
Yeah,
certification, and I'm
yeah.
like, wow, that person, that was trauma. And I
Mm,
didn't realize that at the time. That
mm,
was trauma. And so I think for me, just having that aha moment, being able to see that, wow, the people that I'm working with, they are dealing with trauma, and they have dealt with trauma for the last 10, 20, 30, 40 years, and it's
mhm,
still showing up. And so just
mhm.
having that knowledge as a clinician of color and focusing on this particular population, I think has done wonders for the people that I've worked with and just my
Yes,
practice. And it's
yeah,
been my focus ever since.
yeah,
So
definitely.
so the connection, so how does this all work? When you are a child and you're experiencing these adversities, it's happening at a time where your brain is very vulnerable. Your brain is not developed, right? So what we come into this world with when we're born is the ability to survive.
Mm,
That's really all that we have ready to go, right? So when people look at babies and they think they're being so cute, they're really just trying to survive. They're saying, I'm going to make eye contact with you, and you're going to respond to that, and now you're going to feed me. Now
mhm,
you're going to change me, right? You're going
mhm,
to hold me. I'm
mhm.
actually surviving. Babies, we know that innately, right? And so the rest of our brain takes about 23 to 25 years to develop. So what does that mean? That means that a child that's growing up in an adverse environment, they are experiencing something called toxic stress. So it's the brain stress response to adverse situations, to threat. It's that fight or flight that we're talking about.
Mm,
That fight or flight that we talk about is coupled with stress chemicals. So actual chemicals. So you have these chemicals that are secreted for our survival, to help us to do whatever it is that we need to do, to help us to fight, to help us to flee, to help us to freeze, whatever it is. And those stress chemicals are competing with the developing brain. So this brain that needs 20 years to develop, to fully develop in a healthy way, it needs safety. It needs a nurturing environment. And when that doesn't happen and those chemicals are present, brain damage occurs.
mm,
And
mm,
so does the onset of disease,
mhm,
whether it's physical
mm,
disease or mental disease. And so people who have these ACEs, so the ACE questionnaire
mhm,
brings about this score. So there are 10 questions. And if you say yes to a question, that's 1 point. So that's your ACE score. So if you answer yes to 1, your ACE score is 1. If you answer yes to 10, your ACE score is 10, right? And so I'd say 3 to 4 or more, there's going to be an increase, most likely an increase. Now, this is not necessarily your destiny, and that's where our work comes in, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it doesn't have to happen, but
Yeah.
it is more likely to happen.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's more likely to happen that
Yes.
there'll be an onset of depression, that there'll be an onset of anxiety and other mental disorders. So it's really about the brain's inability to a child's
Mm.
brain's inability to offset that raining down of stress chemicals over time.
Yeah.
So the trauma that we're talking about, it's complex trauma, right? And so
Mhm.
if somebody experiences a car accident, that's something that happens one time. That would be considered an acute trauma, right? It's something that
Mhm.
happens one time, it's quick, it's done.
Mm.
But complex trauma is something that, again, that occurs typically when we're younger. It occurs at the hands of a trusted adult. So there's this betrayal there, right? It's something that's pervasive. It's happening more often than not. And it's a lot for a child to have to contend with, a child's brain to have to contend with.
Ooh. If you're here and you're listening to this and you can see yourself in what we're talking about, I want you to also take away what Sharon said. That's where our work comes in. Like it doesn't have to be that all of what the experiencing these ACEs and the physical illness and the mental health problems that we all have to have it. That when you get help to deal with the traumas that you experience early in life, you stand a better chance of not. And that's why we're here to kind of to talk about that, to give you the information, to let you know that if you do and you're dealing with depression, get help for the depression. Get help for the anxiety, get help for the physical illnesses that you're seeing, the autoimmune illnesses. If you see your young people, and I like to say the behavior tell a story, if they're acting out, if you're a teacher or you're a church leadership, whatever, when you see children and young people behave in a certain way, don't focus on the behavior. Ask what happened.
Right.
Ask what happened, because chances are, if you do, you're going to hear some things that happen that may make you know that we need to do something else. So that's the takeaway. And I know ACE is such a wide subject, and we can't do it the kind of justice that we'd like to do it to today. Now, as I say that, there's a poll, please, that I'd like you to take part in. I'm launching the poll right now. Please, if you answer those questions for us, and we know how to gear future sessions like this to meet your needs. So you've just made the link to mental health, and I know there are many more connections. And when I do retreats, or when I do online courses or anything like that, I like to ask people to do their ACE, to get to see people's ACE score. And sometimes people are really surprised. They're really surprised at their ACE score. But you said something earlier that I wanted to talk about now, that it's not the high risk behavior that caused the outcome, but it's the ACE that caused the outcome. So
Right.
sometimes people might have experienced 3 or 4 or 5 ACE, adverse childhood experiences, don't have a high risk behavior, and feel the outcome is going to be different.
Right.
Do they have the same potential as the person who have the highest behavior, like the drinking, the drug use, or whatever else they're using to cope?
I personally haven't seen alcoholism or drug use without the presence of ACEs.
Yeah.
That's just my own, my own experience. I have not done a study around that, but just
Mm.
anecdotally, I haven't seen substance use disorders without a presence of ACEs. But it was about half of the participants of the study had the high risk behaviors and had the poor health outcomes. So it didn't happen with everybody. About half of the people were impacted because of
Right.
the high risk behaviors. But
Right.
again, it's really about the exposure. It's really about the higher the ACE score, the more likely the poor health outcomes would be present without the high risk behaviors.
There you go. There you go. So the higher the A score, the more likely. So, because I know sometimes we tend to focus on the high risk behavior and feel, so there might be somebody who don't have the high risk behavior, never drink, never take drugs, never do anything like that, but still have the A score. There's what we're saying, that the potential is still there. So it still
Right.
needs to be addressed. That don't keep ignoring. Don't
And
keep
I
ignoring.
think it's very easy and typical for someone to say, well, this is why this is happening to that person, because
Mm,
they're out there doing this or they're
mm,
out there
mm,
doing that.
mm-hmm.
But why are they out there doing that, right? There's a thing that happened before that. And
Yes.
unfortunately, when we're adults, people aren't looking for our ACE scores. They think that we're adults and you should just be able to figure this out. And they
Mhm.
don't care about the story, but we all have a story.
We do
We
indeed.
all have a story. And so that's one of the reasons why in my practice, the ACE study is a part of the intake. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something that I do for everybody across the board. We figure
Mm-hmm.
out the ACEs. And
Mm-hmm.
so, and then I explain what the ACEs are. I explain what they just did and why that's important and why it's important for the work that we're about to do. Because
Yes,
I'd like to know, I want them to know, I want them to be able to make the connection because it's going to play a huge part in the work that we do.
absolutely. 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 And again, I quote this research yesterday that says Afro-Caribbean males are not just males, people are 7 times more likely to be diagnosed with psychosis than our white counterparts. And I wonder about ACE, the contribution of ACE to that to that
Right,
research, to that final
right.
figure. Because the thing that happened here is a lot of people are migrated from the Caribbean, from Africa, from all over Asia. A lot of times children were left and then
Mhm.
come to join, and so of course the leaving is one score, um,
Sure.
and sometimes what happens to them while they're being
While they're
left
left.
maybe add
Absolutely.
2 or 3 to the score, and then
Sure.
when they come to join, there's another one add in. So just in that short span, it's you and then you come into a racist culture that you have to adjust to. So
Right.
the scores are mounting up.
Absolutely.
I think it's not something that we talk about, or even the impact of that on people and people's mental health and people's well-being, about the young person and how they adjust, and the likelihood of how we overpopulate prisons and mental health wards, and how that might contribute to some of these. And it's a conversation that needs to have we need to have more in our community, so people can be aware
Right.
of these things.
That's a conversation that needs to happen, and there's more research that needs to happen as
Yeah,
well.
yeah.
And so the ACE, just in that scenario that you just brought up of a child being left by their parent, um, for good reason, obviously. Um,
Mhm.
the one ACE is separation, parental separation,
Yeah.
and that can be because of exactly what you're saying. And so with that, there's a protective factor. There's protection around being raised in a household with your mom and dad, with your biological parents. And when a child is outside of that scenario, the likelihood of exposure to other adversities heightens.
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
And so there's that. The ACEs don't go into racism at all.
No.
The ACEs don't go into racism. The ACEs don't go into community violence, doesn't go into bullying, it doesn't go into poverty. So we're taking these 10 questions and we can only generalize. And so, what we're saying is that if 50-year-old white men are impacted, I can only imagine what people that fall outside of that, how they are impacted, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of what we're doing is we're deducing, we're
Mhm.
kind of
Mhm.
taking what
Mhm.
was done and making generalizations based on the studies that have been done. So there's more work that needs to be done and more research that needs to be done about, those things specifically. But I mean, the disparities are showing up in COVID-19 cases, right? We're seeing this, a lot of people were talking about why are Black and Brown communities so disproportionately impacted, and they're talking about poor health care and access to health care. And I'm sitting there and I'm just like, that, but ACEs, trauma, discrimination, right? There are millions of people who feel like there are knees on their necks every day, every single day. So what does that do? What happens with that? So we need more research. And I know that there are people out there that, do focus on racial trauma, but we need to do more. There needs to be more work done around that.
Definitely. I'd love to do research. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat, or you can ask them put them in the chat or in the question and answer section. If you have any questions at all for us to look at, please do. We're talking about, if you're just joining us live on YouTube or you're just here now, we're talking about trauma and mental health and some of the things that impact. When Alison spoke at the beginning of this week, she talked about the small t and the little t's. The small t meaning, the stuff, the cumulative things of life, and the big t's would be the ACEs. And all of it work together to contribute to our well-being. And as Sharon, I like that what you said about, I mean, the focus of the study was not marginalized communities. The focus of the study was not us from, people from an oppressed group. The focus of the study was middle class white people. And that was the result. And you're saying, we're just imagining if we do a study in our community, what the results would be.
Right.
Because the circumstances are so different.
Right.
So, and all the more for me, for us to, as a people, have information to make decisions, to look after ourselves, to be mindful of the things that impact us and our mental health, to not ignore, to move past the stigma. We talked about them earlier this week, to move past the stigma and to be able to seek support early before it becomes too late. Seek support for our young people and to seek support for ourselves so we can, limit what we're seeing. We are overrepresented on mental health wards. I never forget when I first started speaking, I met two Black women, and they worked in mental health and they were managing wards, mental health wards. And after I finished speaking, they both said to me, we want to do what you do. We want to get to people before they get to us. Right. We want to get to Black women before they get to us. Us meaning before they get on our wards, for us to treat them. So yeah, I suppose that's why we're having this conversation today, to just kind of give a little insight and some information so you can move quickly or just do something.
Right.
Do you have anything to say before we shift gears slightly? Just one last question that I wanted us to look at.
No.
Okay. If you have any questions, usually the chat is a little bit more active than it is today. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'm going to go check over YouTube as well to see if anybody over there have any questions, but please put them in the chat if you have any questions or any insights. Okay, I want to talk about, we talk about parental separation.
Yeah.
We want to talk about the role of the father. When kids don't have answers, they blame themselves, and how this contributes to mental health. Have you seen this or read about, heard about how this might contribute, the absent father piece? That Brene Brown says, in the absence of data, we tell ourselves stories.
Absolutely. So again, it is one of the ACEs, right? So parental separation. Going back to talking about survival, right? When we're born, the oldest part of our brain is the survival part of our brain. And so we need our parents. We need a safe, nurturing, caring, loving, informative environment to help us to develop the rest, right? So we don't come into this world with a healthy sense of self-esteem. We have to get that from the people that are around us, our
Right.
parents typically,
Yes.
right? Our self-concept, right? Those are things that's why we stay with our parents for so long, some longer than others, right? Um, but during those formative years, we are expected to figure out how to move in this world, figure out what our worth is, our self-esteem, um, our abilities. The more safe and supported you feel at home, the more likely you are to go out and explore
Hmm.
and do wonderful things in the world, right? And so when a parent is not there, um, the idea is that we have two guarantees: our mom and our dad. And so when one is not there, we go inward because we don't necessarily know. We don't have the wisdom as children to understand that maybe dad or mom have their own aces,
Sure.
but that this is not about me,
Yeah.
right? It's very typical for children to go inward, to be very
Hmm.
self-centered. And
Hmm.
so, a lot of there's a there's a biological component to mental illness, but there's also a huge cognitive piece. The things that we think, our thoughts, our self-concept, right? Um, the way that we navigate issues and problems, and all of that comes from our rearing. It comes from being raised in a healthy environment. When that doesn't happen, we're trying to figure it out ourselves, and typically as children we're going to get that wrong. We're going to
Yes.
get it wrong. We don't have the wisdom yet.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just thinking of the child who grew up to be 35 and 45, but that wisdom, that understanding didn't shift, and
Absolutely.
they cannot put their that self-blame, they cannot put that pain in an intergenerational context. As you said, when we're children, we don't know that our parents are doing this because they're providing. We can't figure that out. We just know that they're not there.
Right.
And what that does for us, and how some go inward. Sometimes that's where we see some of the high risk behaviors in our children.
Absolutely. Or looking for other people to fill that
Mhm.
void, and
Mhm.
those other people may not be safe people.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Tend not to be safe people too, because they feel accepted, um they go for that. I My husband worked abroad one couple of years ago, about 2 years ago, 3 years ago. He went away for a month, and my boys changed.
Mm.
It was amazing to see the shift. I saw it with my own eyes, that shift. And we just decided that that couldn't happen again,
Mm.
because the boys just need him to be around. So as adults, we have to kind of manage and curtail some things that we want to do,
Mhm.
because of the children. The boys just completely changed. So it feels like there's a great deal of parental education that is needed, perhaps something for soon to be parents even. I agree totally, totally, Alison, totally. Um, Totally. Lots of education needs to happen. Because
I think
when sorry, Alice, Sharon, you go on.
I was just going to say, I think that it can start with knowing your aces.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And
Yeah.
what that means, what does that mean for me, knowing what my ace is, and what the potential of that is. And Sharon just shared a bit just now, so go back and watch the earlier part of this video, but also, go into Google, and I always say, go search like that. There's a questionnaire there, and you can also, there are books that you can read, understand what impact, what are my aces, and how it's affecting my life. And when
Right.
you look at that, you'll see how it's affecting your children's lives, because it really does affect your children's lives too. So, but we know that there's healing. We know that absolutely, um, you can be healed. You can get help. So as we've said throughout this conference, please get help. Sometimes having a parent, mother or father involved can be even more traumatic. So it's balancing what is best for the child,
For sure.
for
For
sure.
sure. A lot of the complex trauma, again, comes at the hands of trusted
Mhm.
parent. trusted, loving, caring adults, or at least that's what they're supposed to be, right? And so complex trauma typically is it's an interrelational breach. So I'm expecting you to care for me, and that's not what's happening. So yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Absolutely. It's reality for a lot of people. For a lot of children, that is the reality. Okay, so if you have any more questions, again, please put them in the Q&A. What else do you think, Sherry-Ann, what are some of the mental health diagnosis, I'm going to call it, that you see coming out of people who have experienced trauma?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of depression. There's a lot of depression and anxiety. I think that's typically what I'm seeing. There's this diagnosis that has yet to be that hasn't been able to be a part of the DSM. That's our for people who don't know, that's typically what mental health providers use to diagnose. There's also the ICD. And so for us in the US, we have the DSM-5 right now, the 5th version. And so there's the list of all the different diagnoses there. And there's one that's been fought for, but has not been able to, that hasn't been added yet. And it's developmental trauma disorder. And so the idea around developmental trauma disorder is that your cognitive abilities are impacted. So it's this cluster. It's the idea that children are impacted through this cluster of behaviors. So it impacts education, social interaction, self-esteem, cognitive ability, all of these different things. And so you're not just looking at depression, right? You're not just looking at depression. You're looking at this child in this entire context of their development. And a lot of times I talk to my clients about that. I tell them that you have this disorder that has yet to be named. And when I break down what that is exactly, they understand why they had social anxiety, or maybe they were very angry as children. That, they were told that they have attention deficit disorder when it's really more of a cognitive disruption, because again, going back to the brain and those chemicals raining down on that developing brain, there's going to be damage that is going to happen. But that's what I see. I see a lot of depression and anxiety. But for me, I need to diagnose somebody for insurance purposes, really, and to give a context. But I think it's so important to see the client, to see the person that's sitting in front of you, and treating the person, not necessarily a diagnosis. A person's not going to come into your office and you just have this book and it say, okay, do this, this, and this, and it just fits that person. You have to treat them in the context of their life. And so yeah, I definitely diagnose because I have to, but the work is going to be personal.
Yes. That it has to be. There's sometimes that we've read that in England, it is clients are usually offered 6 sessions of therapy. Is the system different in the US? I mean, because of when, for example, somebody goes to their GP and the GP decides to refer them to therapy, sometimes it's 6 sessions that they're offered. If they're not they're not going privately. So that somebody's asking, is it the same? Like, say for example, somebody who is, their insurance is paying, do they pay for a limited number? Is it time limited, or is it open to as long as they
it used to be that way, but because of our former president, Barack Obama, he did a lot of work around mental health parity.
Right.
So and so I started my practice in 2011, and from 2011 and now, when I first started, we had to do the whole, go to the insurance and say this person is presenting like this, and they would typically give us about 12 sessions. And after 12 sessions, you'd have to go back and show that there's still medical necessity. And so today, because of the Healthcare Act. That's not necessarily the case. You do still have to show medical necessity if asked, but for the most part, you have to document your notes in a way that shows that you're treating a particular diagnosis. So
Right.
again, we do need a diagnosis, and that they are the person is still showing medical necessity for the treatment. So
Right.
that really has changed over the last few years. And anytime I can, give some props to Barack Obama, I do that. So that he played a big part in that, and my practice has absolutely changed, and how I do the work has changed over the years because of that.
That sounds great. I mean, I know that the 6 sessions sometimes can be extended. Some places I know extended for those who need it, but I think it's not perhaps as open as because somebody who experienced ACEs, 6 sessions is not going to do it. It's kind of like hello.
Yeah.
It's going to need longer term work to be able to do that, to do the work that's needed to give some people some mechanisms to cope.
And I think that's what the rationale was behind, changing things, because you wouldn't just tell somebody who presented with a physical ailment that, you
Right.
just need 6 sessions and that's it. You're going to treat them, it's going to be personalized treatment, right?
Yes.
And so there's just been a lot of work around just treating mental illness the same way that you would physical illness.
That's right. And I think sometimes maybe that also impact how we respond to it, how we view it, how people ignore that persistent low mood until it becomes chronic and you can't ignore it, you can't get out of bed. How people ignore the anxiety until the panic attack happens where you cannot function. And I suppose what I want you to take away as we're wrapping up is that these ACEs cause some of these illnesses, whatever the behavior, and it's not a high risk behavior situation. It's because of the ACEs that you've experienced.
Right.
And I want to encourage you again, as I do every time, not to ignore symptoms, not to ignore the need that you have, not to ignore the things that you're seeing, and do get help. Somebody rang me, sent me a message last night and said after the session, she said, I'm going to go get help. And I'm thinking, if we get one,
That's beautiful. That's why we're here.
That's why we're here. That's why we're here. So thank you all so much for joining us over YouTube. I can see people are over there, but there are no questions. But I really appreciate your time. It's Sunday, the weather is beautiful, and here you are learning about how to take care of you, and perhaps people in your community will be impacted. So thank you so much. Sharian, thank you for getting up at 7 and coming on and talking to us. And we hope that maybe we'll be able to do this again.
Absolutely. This time flew by. Thank you so much for having me today.
Yes, it did fly by. Thank you everyone. I'll see you at 1. In your emails you should have the links for the next session, so go and have a glass of water, walk around the living room, and stick your head outside for a bit and come back. We're coming back here at 1 when we're in 12 minutes we're talking to Emmanuel, and he's a psychotherapist, and we're going to talk about Black men and mental health. Woo! I'm looking forward to that one. All week I've looked forward to Black men and mental health. So Sharian, thank you again, and we will they're saying thank you as well in the chat. Thank you for coming and for sharing with us. Please remember to go on and watch Sharian's TED Talk on knowing your ACEs. Remember to do that. I might send the link actually when I send the email out this evening, because I have some resources to send out as well. Okay, thank you all again, and have a great day. Bye.
Thank you.